Imagine going to the hospital for a simple treatment and never coming back. From deadly drug overdoses to horrifying surgical mistakes, these are the most shocking and devastating medical disasters in history. Some were accidents, others were pure negligence, but all of them cost innocent lives. Stay tuned as we uncover the deadliest medical mistakes ever made. COVID-19 ventilator misuse and oxygen shortages, 2020 to 2021. During the COVID-19 pandemic, hospitals worldwide faced unprecedented challenges, including ventilator misuse and oxygen shortages that led to thousands of preventable deaths. These errors were caused by inadequate medical training, overwhelmed healthcare systems, and supply chain failures. Ventilators were crucial in treating severe COVID-19 patients experiencing respiratory failure. However, many hospitals lacked trained staff to operate the machines correctly, leading to overventilation, barotrauma, lung damage, and unnecessary deaths. In some cases, patients who could have recovered with less invasive oxygen support were prematurely put on ventilators, worsening their condition. Another major issue was the global oxygen crisis, especially in India, Brazil, and several African nations, where hospitals ran out of medical oxygen due to supply chain failures. Thousands of patients died gasping for air, not because their condition was untreatable, but because hospitals lacked basic life-saving supplies. Governments and hospitals were widely criticized for failing to prepare for the surge in cases, despite early warnings. Corruption, poor resource allocation, and mismanagement of medical equipment contributed to the crisis. In some places, black market oxygen sales emerged, with desperate families paying exorbitant prices to save their loved ones. The pandemic exposed severe weaknesses in global healthcare infrastructure. In response, many countries have since expanded oxygen production facilities, improved ventilator training, and developed better emergency response systems. However, the lives lost due to avoidable mistakes during COVID-19 remain one of the greatest tragedies in modern medical history. The Radium Girls, 1917 to 1926. In the early 20th century, radium was considered a miracle element. It was widely used in medical treatments, beauty products, and industrial applications. One of its most infamous uses was in glow-in-the-dark paint, which was applied to watch dials, aircraft instruments, and military equipment. Factories in the United States, including the U.S. Radium Corporation in New Jersey and Radium Dial Company in Illinois, hired young women to paint these dials, promising them high wages and a bright future. The women were instructed to lip-dip paint, a technique where they shaped the brush tip with their lips before dipping it into the radium-laced paint. This method allowed them to create fine lines for numbers on the watch faces, but also caused them to ingest radioactive material with every stroke. Supervisors assured them that radium was harmless and even encouraged them to use the paint for fun, painting their nails, teeth, and even glowing jewelry. Over time, the women started experiencing mysterious illnesses. Their teeth decayed and fell out, their jaws crumbled, and their bones became fragile. One of the most horrifying symptoms was radium jaw, where the bones in their mouths disintegrated from the inside out. Many developed osteosarcoma, bone cancer, and anemia, while others suffered excruciating pain, fractures, and ultimately death. Doctors were initially baffled by the condition, and many were misdiagnosed. The U.S. Radium Corporation denied responsibility, claiming the workers' illnesses were due to poor hygiene or even sexually transmitted diseases. However, after multiple lawsuits and media exposure, a group of the dying women, later called the Radium Girls, took legal action. Despite being severely ill, these women fought for justice, bringing nationwide attention to industrial safety. Their efforts led to major reforms in workplace safety regulations, including stronger labor laws and the creation of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. Furthermore, Their case contributed to the development of safety protocols for handling radioactive materials, influencing nuclear industry practices. Many of the Radium Girls did not survive to see justice, but their suffering was not in vain. Their tragic deaths helped set the foundation for modern worker protection laws and expose the dangers of unchecked industrial greed. Today, their legacy is a reminder of the importance of corporate accountability and scientific transparency. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study, 1932 to 1972. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study remains one of the most unethical medical experiments in U.S. history. Conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service, PHS, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, the study aimed to observe the long-term effects of untreated syphilis in African American men. However, instead of providing treatment, the researchers deliberately withheld life-saving medication, leading to unnecessary suffering and deaths. The study began in Macon County, Alabama, where 600 black men, 399 with syphilis and 201 without, were recruited under false pretenses. They were told they were receiving free health care for bad blood, a local term used for various illnesses. In reality, they were unknowingly enrolled in an experiment to observe how syphilis progresses when left untreated. Initially, the study was meant to last only 6 months, but when funding for treatment ran out, the researchers decided to continue the experiment indefinitely, rather than provide proper medical care. Even after penicillin was discovered as a cure for syphilis in 1943, the participants were deliberately kept from receiving treatment. Researchers ensured that the men never learned they had syphilis and even blocked them from seeking outside medical care. Many of the men developed serious complications, including blindness, organ failure, neurological disorders, and death. Worse still, the disease was passed on to their wives and children, leading to a devastating cycle of suffering. The experiment continued for 40 years, despite repeated ethical concerns raised by medical professionals. It was only in 1972 that the study was exposed to the public after journalist Jean Heller broke the story in the Associated Press. The national outrage forced the U.S. government to shut down the study immediately. In 1973, the victims and their families filed a lawsuit, eventually winning a $10 million settlement. However, no government officials or scientists involved in the experiment were ever punished. In 1997, President Bill Clinton issued a formal apology on behalf of the U.S. government, acknowledging the deep betrayal of trust and the long-lasting damage caused to the black community. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study had devastating consequences beyond its victims. It shattered public trust in medical institutions, particularly within the African American community, contributing to vaccine hesitancy, fear of clinical trials, and medical skepticism that persist to this day. It also led to sweeping reforms in medical ethics, including the establishment of institutional review boards, IRBs, and stricter patient consent laws to prevent similar atrocities in the future. This case remains a dark stain in medical history, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of racism, deception, and unethical experimentation in healthcare. The Thalidomide Tragedy, 1957 to 1961. Pharmaceutical companies and government agencies were slow to acknowledge the drug's dangers. In 1961, Australian Dr. William McBride and German physician Widukind Lenz independently linked thalidomide to birth defects, triggering global recalls. However, by this point, thousands of babies had already been affected. In the United States, thalidomide was never officially approved due to the efforts of Dr. Frances Kelsey, an FDA reviewer. Despite intense pressure from the manufacturer, she refused to approve the drug, citing insufficient safety data. Her diligence prevented a similar tragedy in the U.S., earning her national recognition. The Thalidomide tragedy led to widespread outrage and numerous lawsuits. Pharmaceutical companies were forced to compensate victims, although many families never received adequate financial support. The scandal also led to sweeping reforms in drug testing and approval processes. Governments worldwide introduced stricter regulations on pharmaceutical safety, including mandatory clinical trials, rigorous animal testing, and the requirement for stronger evidence before a drug could be approved for public use. Despite its horrific history, thalidomide was later found to have medical benefits and is now used under strict controls to treat conditions like leprosy and multiple myeloma, a type of cancer. However, its legacy remains a dark reminder of what happens when pharmaceutical companies prioritize profit over safety. The thousands of children who suffered from its effects serve as a painful lesson in medical ethics and the importance of rigorous drug testing. The Qatar Incident, 1955. The Qatar Incident is one of the most tragic vaccine-related disasters in history. It occurred in the United States when a faulty batch of polio vaccines was released, leading to thousands of cases of polio, hundreds of paralysis cases, and several deaths. This catastrophic error shook public trust in vaccines, but also led to critical improvements in vaccine safety. In the 1950s, polio was a terrifying disease, causing paralysis and death, particularly among children. In 1955, Dr. Jonas Salk's polio vaccine was hailed as a medical breakthrough, and mass vaccination programs began immediately. Several pharmaceutical companies, including Qatar Laboratories, were licensed to produce the vaccine. Qatar Laboratories, a California-based company, manufactured around 120,000 doses of the vaccine that, due to improper production processes, contained live polio virus instead of the inactivated, killed virus. When these vaccines were administered, the result was devastating. Children who received the faulty vaccine developed polio instead of being protected from it. Within weeks, reports emerged of children becoming paralyzed or dying after receiving the Qatar vaccine. Investigations found that Qatar's manufacturing process had failed to fully inactivate the virus. As a result, around 40,000 children developed polio, 200 were permanently paralyzed, and at least 10 died. The Qatar incident led to an immediate recall of the defective vaccine, and the U.S. government introduced stricter vaccine safety regulations. The disaster also spurred the establishment of better oversight and quality control procedures in vaccine production. Despite the tragedy, the polio vaccination campaign continued, eventually leading to the near eradication of the disease worldwide. This incident remains one of the most severe examples of a pharmaceutical failure, but also served as a lesson in the importance of rigorous testing and oversight in vaccine production. It reinforced the need for stringent safety protocols and ultimately helped shape modern vaccine development, ensuring that such a catastrophe would never happen again. The Dalkon Shield disaster, 1970s. The Dalkon Shield was an intrauterine device, IUD, marketed as a safe and effective form of birth control in the early 1970s. However, it became one of the deadliest medical mistakes in history, causing severe infections, infertility, miscarriages, and deaths in thousands of women worldwide. The tragedy was worsened by corporate greed, as the manufacturer knowingly concealed safety concerns while aggressively marketing the device. The Dalkon Shield was developed by the A.H. Robbins Company and introduced in 1971 as a revolutionary contraceptive. It featured a unique multifilament string, which was intended to make it more effective than other IUDs. However, this string had a fatal flaw. It acted as a pathway for bacteria, leading to serious pelvic infections, sepsis, and even death. Despite early warning signs, A.H. Robbins aggressively promoted the device, claiming it was safer than oral contraceptives. Over 2.8 million women in the U.S. alone had the Dalkon Shield inserted. Soon, hospitals began reporting a surge in cases of pelvic inflammatory disease, PID, septic abortions, and life-threatening infections linked to the device. Many women suffered permanent infertility due to the damage caused by infections. In some cases, the IUD had to be surgically removed, often resulting in severe internal scarring. Others were unable to conceive due to blocked fallopian tubes. Tragically, several women died from sepsis and complications associated with the IUD. Even as evidence mounted, the company ignored reports and denied responsibility. Internal memos later revealed that A.H. Robbins knew about the risks but prioritized profits over patient safety. It wasn't until 1974 that the FDA finally intervened, leading to the withdrawal of the device from the market. A massive class action lawsuit followed, with over 300,000 women filing claims. A.H. Robbins declared bankruptcy in 1985, setting up a $2.4 billion compensation fund for victims. The scandal led to stricter regulations for medical devices, including the Medical Device Amendments of 1976, which mandated more rigorous testing and approval processes. The Dalkin Shield disaster remains a chilling example of corporate negligence in medicine. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of poorly tested medical devices and the need for stronger consumer protections. The mad cow disease crisis, 1880s to 1990s. The mad cow disease crisis, also known as bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE, was a deadly outbreak caused by contaminated beef, leading to fatal brain disease in both cattle and humans. The crisis, primarily affecting the United Kingdom, resulted in the deaths of over 200 people, the slaughter of millions of cows, and a global food safety scandal. Mad cow disease is a neurodegenerative disorder caused by misfolded proteins known as prions. When infected cattle were processed into meat and bone meal, a cheap feed supplement used to boost protein levels in livestock, other cows became infected. This created a self-perpetuating cycle, spreading the disease rapidly through the UK's cattle industry. In 1986, British farmers first noticed cows displaying strange behaviors, including aggression, lack of coordination, and difficulty walking, hence the name mad cow disease. Scientists soon identified BSE as the cause, but government officials and meat industry leaders downplayed the risk to avoid economic losses. By the early 1990s, the crisis escalated when humans who consumed infected beef began developing a fatal condition called variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, VCJD. Victims experienced memory loss, hallucinations, severe neurological decline, and ultimately death. There was no cure, and the disease was 100% fatal. The UK government initially refused to acknowledge the link between contaminated beef and VCJD, reassuring the public that British beef was safe. However, scientific evidence contradicted these claims, and in 1996 officials were forced to admit the connection. By this time, the damage was irreversible. To contain the outbreak, the UK slaughtered over 4.4 million cattle, leading to economic devastation for farmers and the beef industry. Many countries, including the United States and European nations, banned British beef imports, further crippling the economy. Public outrage erupted as it was revealed that the government had ignored early warnings from scientists. Investigations found that officials deliberately delayed taking action to protect the beef industry, risking thousands of lives in the process. By the early 2000s, strict new regulations were implemented worldwide to prevent prion diseases in food supply chains. Governments banned feeding cows with meat and bone meal, enforced rigorous slaughterhouse inspections, and introduced better disease tracking systems. The mad cow disease crisis remains one of the worst public health failures of modern times. It exposed dangerous flaws in the food industry, government cover-ups, and the devastating consequences of ignoring scientific warnings. Even today, cases of variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease occasionally emerge, proving that the effects of the disaster still linger. Dr. Michael Swango's killing spree, 80s to 90s. Dr. Michael Swango, one of history's most notorious medical serial killers, exploited his position as a doctor to murder over 60 patients and potentially many more across the United States and abroad. His case exposed glaring failures in hospital oversight, background checks, and medical accountability, allowing him to continue killing for nearly 2 decades. Swango began his medical career in the 1980s after graduating from Southern Illinois University School of Medicine. Early on, colleagues noticed his obsession with death, often collecting news clippings about violent crimes and expressing disturbing admiration for disasters. During his medical training, numerous patients mysteriously died under his care, yet no formal investigation was conducted. After securing a residency at Ohio State University Medical Center, nurses grew suspicious when seemingly healthy patients died suddenly after receiving injections or food from Swango. Despite multiple complaints, hospital administrators refused to take action, allowing him to continue working. When Ohio State finally investigated, Swango was quietly dismissed, but no police report was filed, enabling him to find new hospital jobs. Over the next decade, he moved between Illinois, South Dakota, New York, and even Zimbabwe, using fake credentials and falsified records. In each location, patients died under suspicious circumstances, often after receiving medication or food from him. Authorities finally caught him in the late 1990s after an FBI investigation uncovered his pattern of poisoning patients and colleagues. Swango was convicted in 2000, receiving multiple life sentences for murder, fraud, and malpractice. His case revealed shocking failures in medical licensing and hospital oversight. Institutions repeatedly ignored warnings and failed to share information, allowing Swango to continue practicing medicine despite clear evidence of wrongdoing. As a result, hospitals strengthened background checks, improved whistleblower protections, and introduced stricter monitoring of medical professionals. The Swango case remains one of the most chilling examples of how a system designed to heal can become a tool for killing when oversight fails. The heparin contamination scandal, 2008. The heparin contamination scandal of 2008 exposed serious flaws in global pharmaceutical manufacturing, leading to at least 81 deaths and hundreds of severe allergic reactions in the United States. This deadly medical mistake stemmed from tainted blood thinner imported from overseas, highlighting the dangers of outsourcing drug production without strict quality controls. Heparin, a widely used anticoagulant, blood thinner, is crucial for preventing blood clots in patients undergoing surgery or dialysis. In early 2008, U.S. hospitals noticed a sudden spike in severe allergic reactions among patients receiving heparin, including shock, low blood pressure, difficulty breathing, and organ failure. Many of these cases resulted in death. Investigators traced the contaminated heparin to Baxter International, a major pharmaceutical company. Further inquiries revealed that key ingredients were sourced from China, where they had been deliberately adulterated with a cheaper toxic substitute known as oversulfated chondroitin sulfate, OSCS. This substance mimicked heparin's chemical properties, but caused dangerous immune system reactions. The contamination was not an accident. It was a case of pharmaceutical fraud. Suppliers in China had intentionally added the cheaper substitute to increase profits, bypassing quality control measures. Since most of the U.S.'s heparin supply came from China, the contamination quickly spread across hospitals, leading to a national crisis. Regulatory agencies, including the FDA, faced criticism for failing to detect the issue sooner. At the time, inspections of overseas drug manufacturers were minimal, allowing unregulated and poorly monitored facilities to supply critical medications. In response to the disaster, the U.S. government overhauled its drug safety laws, introducing stricter quality checks, mandatory foreign facility inspections, and tighter regulations on pharmaceutical imports. The heparin scandal shattered public trust in global drug supply chains and highlighted the need for stricter oversight of foreign manufacturers. It served as a wake-up call for the pharmaceutical industry, proving that cutting costs at the expense of patient safety can have deadly consequences. The chemotherapy overdose of Pablo Garcia, 2013. One of the most devastating modern medical errors occurred in 2013 when a 16-year-old boy named Pablo Garcia received a fatal overdose of chemotherapy due to a hospital software glitch and human error. This tragic mistake highlighted the dangers of over-reliance on medical technology and the importance of double-checking automated systems in hospitals. Pablo Garcia was undergoing treatment for a rare genetic disorder at Children's Hospital Oakland in California. As part of his treatment, he was supposed to receive a standard single dose of a chemotherapy drug, Septra, trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. However, due to a critical error in the hospital's computerized prescription system, he was instead given 38 times the intended dose. The overdose happened because of a software malfunction combined with human oversight. The hospital's automated medication ordering system, CPOE, miscalculated the dosage, and the error was not caught by the medical staff. Nurses and pharmacists trusted the computer-generated dosage without verifying it manually. Shortly after receiving the excessive dose, Pablo experienced multiple organ failure, extreme toxicity, and internal bleeding. Despite emergency intervention, he died within days from complications caused by the overdose. This case exposed serious flaws in electronic health record (EHR) systems, which many hospitals rely on for medication management. While automation is meant to reduce human error, it also introduces new risks, especially when healthcare professionals blindly trust technology without performing manual checks. Following the tragedy, hospitals worldwide reviewed their medication safety protocols, reinforcing manual cross-checking of dosages, improved staff training, and stricter software validation procedures. Pablo Garcia's death serves as a stark reminder that even the most advanced medical technology cannot replace human vigilance.